Welcome everyone to the Carbon Plan for the People webinar. We're delighted that you're here, and we hope to have a comprehensive discussion with everyone about the carbon plan and the work that we have done at NCIPL to advocate for a plan for the people. I would like to note that we encourage you to ask questions throughout the presentation, but given how the format is for this, we're going to reserve questions for the end. So please put them in the chat and we'll make sure to record them and ask them at the end. Yes, and I also wanted to make sure to introduce Susanna and I. While I started working at NCIPL in July during the start of the carbon hearings, Susanna has actually been working with NCIPL for over a decade. She's been working extensively with utilities across the state as a representative of the North Carolina Interfaith Power Light's congregational facilities. As together we work to advocate for energy equity and democracy as a moral imperative. And I am Ren Martin, and as I said before, I'm a newer employee at the North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light and North Carolina Council of Churches. I was born in Richmond, but I'm really glad that I'm here in North Carolina now. So as we begin, we would like to acknowledge we'd like to acknowledge that the land we each reside within and depend upon is Indigenous land. This recognition is one way we seek to orient ourselves in this work and do the work of justice in our communities. May we honor each tribe, this ancestral land, and their leadership presence today. With our commitments to repair the harm of the present and the past, we will now uplift that where I live in the town named Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I reside on occupied lands of the Eno, Shikori, Occaneechi, and Saponi Native peoples. I invite all of us to actually take a moment to drop into the chat box the peoples whose land you reside on and rely on now. If you do not know, then here's an invitation to learn at nativeland.ca. You can find that at the top of that slide, as well as in the chat in just a moment.
And as we gather here today on September 28th, which no doubt will turn out to be a very historic day as we hold in our hearts everything in the path of Hurricane Ian. I'm asking that we each take 3 deep breaths and send our love, our light, and our spirits to the animals, to the creatures, to the water, to the land, to the soil, and of course to all the people that we care deeply about as we all aim to protect the people and places we love. So if you'll take deep breaths with me, please breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. Breathe in release. Our prayers abound. As we gather today to discuss and plan a path for a fossil-free North Carolina. Thank you for being here today.
And with that, I wanted to share the agenda with you all. We already did the welcome and land acknowledgement introduction. We'll have an introduction of the carbon plan a little bit more and the purpose of the webinar. We'll talk about the carbon plan hearings, the intervening overview, and we'll discuss what that means as well. Ways to get involved to, act on climate, and a community discussion followed by any closing statements for all of us. And I pass it to Susanna.
Thank you. Well, as we said, we are here today to talk about climate change and how to get to a path to a fossil-free North Carolina. So some of you are already familiar with where we're at, but we want to start at the beginning because that's a very good place to start, as we know. I'm going to go back and share that it was in October of 2021 that the North Carolina General Assembly and Governor Cooper signed a new energy bill into law. The new law was called the North Carolina called upon the North Carolina Utilities Commission to develop a carbon plan for the state by the end of 2022, this year, that will reduce carbon dioxide emissions to 70% below 2005 levels by 2030 and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050. And this matches what the governor had established in his Executive Order 80 when he began developing a climate plan for North Carolina. So obviously the final plan will have far-reaching implications for the Tar Heel State's economy, climate efforts, and public health. We came together along with many other organizations across the state that care about climate justice and environmental justice and formed a loose coalition that we call People Power NC. We're a group of clean energy and social justice organizations that envision a North Carolina where everyone, no matter where they live, has a right to clean and affordable energy and is assured of equitable energy production, transmission, distribution, and consumption that doesn't harm our health, pollute our soil, air, or water, or further devastate our climate. So collectively, People Power NC has outlined 12 principles for a carbon planning process that would establish North Carolina as a leader in the country for emission reduction. With these principles, the North Carolina Utility Commission would begin to build a modern, fossil-free energy system that works for every North Carolina home, congregation, business, school, nonprofit, everyone, every single person in North Carolina, which is why we are so glad you're here with us today to help spread the information and resources that make sure that this is a totally inclusive process as it literally and figuratively impacts every single person in the state. So these 12 principles that we collectively developed strive to indicate what a carbon plan created in the public interest would acknowledge and include, and to serve as a call to action to groups across North Carolina with an interest and a stake in decarbonizing our electric power system. Excuse me, I'm going to take a sip. As we go into the 12 principles, you can see them. It might be a little bit small on your screen there, but number one, and this is a priority piece of information to share with your communities and your colleagues. This is the responsibility of the North Carolina Utilities Commission. The law states clearly that the carbon reduction goals and the plan that dictates how Duke Energy will achieve them are the responsibility of the commissioners of the Utility Commission. It is important to ensure that the carbon plan represents our interests as North Carolina citizens, not Duke Energy's investors, which is why we need to center stakeholder feedback. Every North Carolina city, business, household, congregation, community, school will be impacted by the design of the carbon plan. We all deserve to make our voices heard and share our valuable input. And Ren is going to give us a lot of information about how to do that. The process should be transparent and accessible for all. And I'll say to this point, it's been complicated and confusing, and there's just been a few voices that have been amplified. So this is why we want to really uplift the explicit focus on environmental justice that should be a part of this process. We want to establish comprehensive metrics for success. Of course, we can't just say we're going to do something without a clear plan on how to achieve that and metrics and benchmarks to be assured we're achieving it. We want the work to reflect previous energy plan processes. This isn't coming from out of the blue, which is one of the reasons that I mentioned Governor Cooper's Executive Order 80. We have a climate risk and resilience report that was made for North Carolina. The carbon plan most certainly should be intersecting with all of the different projects, procedures, research, data, storytelling that's taken place around climate and climate justice in North Carolina. And so we need a carbon plan in the public interest that reflects all of that previous work and will become the guide and resource and really telltale sign for where we're going to go moving forward. We want to maximize near-term deployment of renewable resources and storage. We know we have the solutions readily available. And so that's what we want to design and develop and implement as soon as possible. We've been waiting far too long. It is 2022. We are in the middle of a climate emergency. We know what is happening today and what will happen over the course of the next many days with Hurricane Ian and all of the future, what I would refer to as non-natural disasters, because we have had such a huge influence in creating this incredible shift in our climate system and our weather system, and the direct impacts and directly impacted communities that suffer first and worse from us waiting so long to take action. So this is our time. We want to set an ambitious timeline for the closing goal. We want to close coal. We want to make sure that unnecessarily expensive and disproportionately air that pollutes air and water in communities of color and low wealth communities is addressed today. This isn't something that we have years and years and years to wait for. It should have happened a long time ago. And now is our time to make sure that it happens, especially in relationship to this carbon plan. And with that, absolute priority is to allow no new gas. And I'm going to talk about that in a little bit, and the relationship of the North Carolina Council of Churches and our commitment to stopping any new fossil fuel infrastructure in North Carolina. And finally, well, not finally, we want to capture maximum benefits of customer-owned resources. And Sophie Loeb has a video that we're going to share from the Center for whoa, gosh, Sophie, I'm talking so fast.
Progressive reform, you got it.
For progressive reform, CPR. That's what I always remember about your organization. It's CPR for the planet. So we'll be talking more about customer-owned resources. Thanks for jumping in. We want the carbon plan to lead to fair and affordable rates for all. And I'm going to speak more to that about our process and being involved in this docket. We want to address historic harms for fossil fuels and dirty energy. There is a lot going on the international and domestic front about talking about climate finance and loss and damage and all of those things that have already happened from our inadequate addressing of the climate crisis and the pollutant generation that we have had in North Carolina and across the globe. So addressing those historic harms is something that the carbon plan needs to do as well. And then finally, we want to identify and drive changes in state and local policies necessary for the plan execution. Again, this carbon plan is a plan. What happens with the plan is long-term implementation strategies that are going to require policy changes and exciting new innovation and commitment to clean energy, renewable energy, and energy equity and democracy for all. So finally, People Power NC envisions a North Carolina centered on anti-racist energy policies that are determined democratically with democratic accountability at all levels of government. People Power NC envisions a North Carolina that is fossil fuel free and empowered by renewable energy with a clean energy economy where workers are free to unionize, valued for their work, and a guaranteed living wage for their occupations and employers. So I'm going to pass it over to Ren to do a little bit more of clarity of the timeline of where we're at in the carbon plan. And then we'll get into some of the details of how North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light is involved, how the Center for Progressive Reform is helping to really guide us through the process. And we're going to hear from an individual intervener as well, and their perspective of following what is happening in the evidentiary hearings that are currently taking place. So back to you, Ren.
Yeah, so we really wanted to help demystify the process and the timeline of the carbon plan and how it came to be. And as we said before, in October of 2021, the General Assembly and the governor actually signed an energy bill into law that really gave birth to the carbon plan. And then it was in the jurisdiction of the North Carolina Utilities Commission, and it still is. But in shortly after, they gave the reins to Duke to propose their own plan, and so in May, Duke actually filed their plan. And there was also another report, the Synapse report, that was filed in July that offered a bit more of a like comprehensive analysis that included a plan that did not include new gas. And then in the summer, there are actually public and intervening comments that took place. And that's all online. And then in July and August, there were public hearings, both in person and virtually. In July, there were 4 hearings, and we'll talk about those a little bit more. And there were also 2 additional hearings in August that had a capacity cap of around like 30 people, something around that number. In September, currently we're having evidentiary hearings. And so final comments are filed earlier, and interveners are currently testifying in court. And in December, is speculated to be the completion of the plan. That's when it should be finalized. We'll see if that happens the way that it was projected to. And then I wanted to talk a little bit more specifically about the carbon hearings. The 4 in-person hearings that were held in Durham, Wilmington, Asheville, and Charlotte. And there was a great turnout for the hearings. I attended 2 of them myself, the Durham one and the Charlotte one. In Durham, there were over 120 people inside of the courthouse. And I think about 50 people signed up to speak, though it went so late into the night, around like 9:30, like even later than 9:30, that only about 38 people or 36 people ended up actually testifying. And there was also a discrepancy in that number because there was a walkout protest that happened in the Durham courthouse. Around 10 people or so ended up walking out. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a video I'll show you. And the makeup of people who attended and spoke was actually very, very diverse. It was a mix of local residents, nonprofit advocates, government officials, and Duke representatives. And in the Charlotte hearing, there were over 100 people in the courtroom and 35 people actually testified. And earlier in the day, we held a rally where I personally was able to speak to news outlets and around 75 people to share my story and to have a call to action. And I believe that Susanna, you went to the Asheville and the Wilmington gatherings before the hearings. Is there anything that you wanted to like say about those before I get into the clip?
Well, of course, I was with you in Durham, and that was our first hearing. And yes, traveling to Asheville, it was important. We felt, although I did not attend the hearings in person inside the building, I wanted to serve in solidarity for all of our congregational network and all of the wonderful folks that just took the time to turn out and share their story and show that we see you and we are grateful. And it's really your voices that we want to be lifting up. So it was really powerful, and it was awesome that Ren was invited to speak at the press conference in Charlotte. So yes, this has been an amazing journey across the state. And thank you also to all of the folks that submitted written comments, because that there was an unlimited amount of opportunity to submit written comments in comparison to actually getting to speak directly to the commissioners. So this is something that we want to continue to educate, inspire, and mobilize people to do, is to lift up our voices and make sure that we're being heard through these important processes. So thanks, Ren, for that.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And so now I wanted to share a clip with you all that kind of wraps up the whole experience of the hearings. And Susanna, just give me like a thumbs up if you're like able to hear what's being said.
Working on an energy plan that could change how we address the climate crisis. The carbon plan was born from a desire to get to net zero emissions by 2050, but we have a long way to go before the plan is ready to be finalized. Over the summer, North Carolinians were able to address their needs for this new plan.
Around the world, millions are being displaced by environmental catastrophes, and it's only being exacerbated by the climate crisis.
We heard the people united must be heard. The people united must be heard.
Communities spoke out about climate change, our kids' futures, and Duke's plan not being enough.
Fossil free! Fossil free! Fossil free! Fossil free!
The voices of our community need to be heard, and until the carbon plan is complete, there's always more to say.
Yeah, I just wanted to note that for the people that walked out, I was not one of them. That footage was from the Charlotte rally, actually, that were in a garden in the park, and then we walked to the building for the hearings. So that was just a clip for flavor. Yeah, and I really wanted to just have the takeaway message from this, that Duke Energy, the energy provider for our state, has been given free rein by the Utility Commission to write the first iteration of potential plans, and in preparation for creating the final version of the carbon plan. The four hearings were held to gather community testimony and opinion. And during these meetings, the commission overwhelmingly received public testimony in favor of a more robust carbon plan. Several environmental nonprofits, including members of our very own Eco-Justice Connection, were present to give testimony. And although many have spoken out at the hearings, there's still more public outreach work and engagement that needs to be done. And this is one of the many reasons why the North Carolina Council of Churches has been an official intervener in this planning process. And so I'll pass it to Susanna to talk about the intervening.
Yeah, thank you. So I want to give another shout out to the Center for Progressive Reform. And you're going to, again, hear from Sophie in a recording that she created. And I'm so glad you're on with us right now, Sophie, as well. What an incredible partnership this has been, as we've begun to develop opportunities and ways for our communities to be heard, especially around the issues that we care most about with regards to climate justice and racial justice and equity. I'm honored to work very closely with Reich Longest, who's the director of Duke University's Environmental Law and Policy Clinic. Professor Longest offered to serve as our lawyer in the intervening process. So that is a real honor. And I'm just always inspired by his brilliance and ability to be a voice of justice in North Carolina. And so I'm going to share a little bit about what we wrote in our petition to intervene. So Reich shared, on behalf of the North Carolina Council of Churches, members of 27 distinct judicatories from 18 denominations, North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light has intervened in the biennial integrated resource plans and carbon plan, which is the technical name of this docket in the Utility Commission. The North Carolina Council of Churches and its members have a direct and substantial interest in this proceeding. Churches who are members of the North Carolina Council of Churches are ratepayers to Duke Energy Progress and Duke Energy Carolinas, and therefore are subject to the regulatory rulings of the North Carolina Utility Commission. So we're directly impacted by the decisions made through this docket, as well as all of you on this call and every other person in North Carolina. Through the North Carolina Interfaith Power and Light Project, North Carolina Council of Churches educates and advocates regarding the theological call to care for creation through a number of actions directly impacted by the IRP, which is the Integrated Resource Plan, and the Carbon Plan. These actions include supporting congregational level actions, reducing energy use through energy efficiency, energy conservation, and use of renewable energy. NCIPL educates and advocates for policies and systems to achieve improved spiritual and physical health, justice, peace, and sustainability for future generations when responding creatively to climate change. Plans proposed and established in this proceeding directly impact these missions and programs. So I'm very proud that we were able to put that language in front of the commission and be approved as formal interveners, because we believe this is a moral imperative, as we said in the beginning, and that aspect of our spiritual life and our, what we like to refer to as our What I Love campaign, we want that always to be a part of the dialogue of why and how we do things in North Carolina, and why and how we make the decisions that we do for the people and places that we love in North Carolina. So when we were accepted as interveners, we were then able to provide our comments and file official official filings into the docket. So when you file a public comment, that is something that is received as with gratitude. Certainly we want people to be providing public comment, and it does go into the record, and it's something that is referenced when decision makers are looking at how they want to finalize their decision. When someone is an intervener, like NCIPL has been, amongst many other interveners, this is, from my understanding, one of the largest engaged dockets in the history of the Utility Commission. There are well over 30 intervening organizations. So there's a lot of input, and that becomes part of the official legal record of the docket. So we wanted to be sure that our comments became a part of that official docket from a legal perspective, which is why we have Professor Longus representing us. So briefly, it was much longer, and we will share with you the entirety of what we submitted. But briefly, our point was to lift up the issues and impacts of energy burden in North Carolina. So according to this was included in our comments, according to the North Carolina Clean Energy Plan, finalized by North Carolina's Department of Environmental Quality, DEQ, in October 2019, quote, low-income households in North Carolina spend a disproportionate percentage of their household income on energy costs related to their higher income counterparts. And that is the long sentence of what the definition of energy burden is that we all have to pay the same rates, except that it's not in any comparison to what our levels of income are. So if I'm making $15 an hour, I'm paying the same rate for my energy costs as someone who makes $1 million an hour or whatever amount that anyone has as their income. It's just incredibly inequitable. And so energy burden is a major, major issue that we've been working with NCIPL and our volunteers and all of our congregations and folks that spend time with us at the legislature and meeting our elected officials to educate around the issues of energy burden, because it's not fair. And we believe in fair shares. We all need to pay our fair shares. And so when around 1.4 million households live with unaffordable energy bills, where their energy burden is greater than 6% of their overall income, this is immoral from our perspective. The poorest households, or those living with incomes below 50% of the federal poverty level, spend 33% of their income on energy bills. And this trend is particularly true for low-income renters who live at or below the poverty line and whose energy bills may actually represent a larger expense than their rent. That's insane to me, especially because we recognize that at this point in our society, access to energy is a human right. And without access to energy, we don't have access to education. We don't have access to healthcare. It's an important part of the way in which we live and breathe in this world, that it is time that we really address the issues of energy burden from a moral imperative perspective. So these were the words that we wanted to make sure were in this docket around the carbon plan. And we know that disproportionate energy burdens mean that low-income ratepayers must make the choice between keeping their electricity on and buying other essential needs such as food and medicine. We wanted that to be in the carbon plan docket. And so that's why we were able to file as a formal intervener and represent as many as 1 million families in North Carolina that have fallen behind on their electric, water, and sewage bills. So with that, I'm very, very grateful again that Sophie Loeb is on this call and has prepared a video for us to explain the Center for Progressive Reform's perspectives on this. And I am learning so much from people like Sophie, who's a colleague and has become a dear friend, and soon will be living in North Carolina in the next month. So we're really excited. The Center for Progressive Reform is a national organization working on really important issues, and we're going to be extremely, it's an extreme blessing to have Sophie focused on North Carolina. And so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Sophie's video. I actually can't hear her, Ren, so.
I believe I have to unmute.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today virtually. My name is Sophie Loeb and I'm the Climate Justice Policy Fellow at the Center for Progressive Reform. The Center for Progressive Reform is a think tank that harnesses the power of law and public policy to build a more equitable future for all people. The center's vision of thriving communities on a resilient planet requires a fundamental redistribution of democratic power back to all Americans, especially the working poor and those from marginalized communities. The center has recognized its need for a North Carolina carbon plan that equitably serves all North Carolinians, regardless of wealth or background. The center recently launched the Campaign for Energy Justice, in part to support the work of North Carolina Interfaith Power Light, who has brought us here today. So thank you. We've also come up with a set of critiques and recommendations for the North Carolina Utilities Commission. First, the lack of clarity around why the North Carolina Utilities Commission, or Commission, delegated the monumental task of drafting and engaging stakeholders in the decarbonization planning process to Duke Energy, when in fact House Bill 951 clearly tasked the commission with such responsibilities. So pushing back on the commission, advocating for alternatives to the Duke Energy plan, it's time for us to ensure that racial and economic equity and justice are centered meaningfully. That means now and during every step of the process moving forward. To that end, our main critique is that the process thus far for engaging the public in the carbon plan has been lacking. been confusing and at times impossible for the public to adequately participate. And we're very concerned about this. There are multiple dockets related to this climate action planning process, and they're unreasonably siloed and complex and require administrative knowledge. This bars individuals without significant time and resources from fully participating. These barriers, among others, have been disregarded by the Commission. Nor has there been any serious and meaningful attempt to engage frontline or environmental justice affected communities that will be impacted by the Commission's actions. And that's where we push back. Without this oversight and accountability from the Commission on the carbon plan, North Carolina's carbon reduction commitments will likely not be fulfilled. Low wealth ratepayers will be left with the worst repercussions. Low wealth families are disproportionately of color and are often on the front lines of the climate crisis. Those who are already struggling will face even greater challenges to afford reliable access to electricity for those basic needs in everyday life. So not only is Duke Energy's carbon plan a matter of environmental concern, it's a matter of economic and racial justice. So getting it right will strengthen North Carolina and serve as a model for other states across the US. So the center has actively engaged in advocacy related to the carbon plan, including providing recommendations via public comment, blog posts, and other forms of media to ensure that the remainder of the public engagement process solicits and incorporates the input of citizens and ratepayers across the state. The hope is that this, in collaboration with the work on the ground of many stakeholders involved in the coalition, this results in an affordable, clean energy plan for all. So some of the main concerns at the center have been asking the Commission to engage low to moderate wealth ratepayers who bear a heavy energy burden, ultimately absorb the lion's share of environmental, health, and financial costs associated with Duke Energy's proposed plan. We've also pushed the Commission to consider the overlooked asset of consumer-owned generation. So just the top 3 recommendations. Again, we pushed the Commission to adopt an affordable carbon plan that incorporates meaningful environmental justice affected community input. That means active outreach and engagement to low wealth ratepayers. We've also pushed the Commission to pass the benefit of decarbonization onto all North Carolinians in the form of fair and affordable rates and investments in programs to increase energy security, for example, in energy efficiency resources. We've also asked the Commission to consider the overlooked asset of consumer-owned generation, distributed energy, community solar, these assets that can negate the need to invest in gas power or to expand gas power. So without a fair, equitable, and meaningful carbon plan development process, this current proposed plan will exclude those least able to afford the damage dealt by carbon pollution and high-cost utilities. Again, many are already struggling to pay the bills and keep the lights on, and millions of North Carolinians, millions even more, may be left without reliable and affordable power to heat, cool, light their homes, cook, clean, relax, and play, and just live. Low-wealth communities face potential for the disproportionate environmental, health, and affordability impacts associated with Duke Energy's current plan, and these impacts will only exacerbate existing health disparities in these communities. In order to disrupt the cycle of environmental health disparities, it is imperative that we as advocates push the Commission to improve public participation and consider consumer-owned generation as an overlooked asset. By engaging environmental justice communities and embracing decentralized renewable energy resources, the Commission can pass the benefits of decarbonization on to all North Carolinians and produce a plan that works. Thanks for having me here today. I hope you have a wonderful day.
You can see what an incredible gift it is to have an opportunity to partner with the Center for Progressive Reform. I am learning so much, and I hope as we move forward, everyone on the call, we might be able to get Sophie to come out and be speak in front of us live sometime when we start putting together again our wonderful in-person gatherings that we've missed so much. So with that, we're going to move forward to our next guest speaker, who is not on the call with us right now because I believe he is actually witnessing live the evidentiary hearings. Some of you know Brad Rouse. Brad also lives in Asheville, actually, a good activist in Asheville. And Brad is someone who we've known for a long time with NCIPL. Brad has served on our volunteer energy working group and been an advisor for many of us from a policy. He has a utilities background, so he's very familiar with how utilities operate and work. And most recently, Brad wrote a book called The Climate Warrior. And so I'm going to drop that into the chat so folks that are interested, if you don't already have a copy, Brad will be happy to get that for you, or you can contact us and we'll make sure that you have access to it. So with that, Brad, what's interesting about Brad is with all of his knowledge, he is a climate warrior, true and tried. And he knew that he wanted to have his voice heard again in that legal level of the filing of the docket. So Brad is representing himself as an intervener. And so I asked him to create a video to tell us his story about what he's experiencing. And so we'll hear from his perspective. So let's go to that video.
There we go.
Well, thanks everybody for giving me a chance to talk about the Duke Carbon Plan. It's really pretty incredible experience for me because I had an opportunity to intervene myself. So I'm at the table. It's basically I filed to be an intervener, and then I called myself as an expert witness so that I was able to submit written testimony that gets a little bit higher profile than some of the other comments that people were able to add. And it's really been quite an interesting experience. I've spent the last 2 weeks there watching it go back and forth, and it's been a real eye-opener. It's a court case that goes on. There are basically, if you think of a rectangle, there are 4 sides to the rectangle, the way the room is set up. You've got the commissioners on one end, sitting above everybody else. Then on to the left of the commissioners, as you're facing them, you got a bunch of lawyers from Duke. To the right, you've got a bunch of lawyers who are interveners, or in my case, I'm not a lawyer, but I was able to sit there and ask questions from time to time. And then facing the commissioners, you've got the witnesses who are being called to testify. And then you've got behind that all of the people in the room who are just there waiting their turn or whatever. The witnesses, or rather the interveners, include a pretty interesting group: the Attorney General's office, the big environmental organizations, some of the smaller environmental organizations are represented. There's a couple of wind energy groups. There's Solar Energy or Clean Power Suppliers Association. There's battery storage groups, industrial customers. Walmart has a representative there. So it's and the tech customers, called basically Apple and Google and Facebook, and those guys are there. And we're all collectively trying to get. Well, we have different people with different interests in the room, but the commission is trying to come to the right conclusion of what's the best way to have a carbon plan going forward into the middle of the century that will reduce carbon emissions. We'll go to net zero by 2050, a 70% reduction by 2030. And Duke has set out, and I think these are pretty reasonable goals, set out 4 main goals for the process. One is affordability. So that has to do with cost. How much is all this going to cost? Another is obviously achieving the carbon reductions. Another is the reliability of the system. So they want to be able to provide reliable electric power. And that is what Duke does justify a lot of what they do. And they do have pretty reliable power. I would say they say they're some of the best. And then executability, that's another factor which is important. Is yeah, you say you want this, but can you get the job done? They do a lot of things in terms of executability. One of the big issues in the whole plan is can they connect all the solar that the modeling process would say that they want to be able to connect. Now, the process that's come up to this point is it's just been an incredible amount of paper that's been filed. Some thousands of pages. Some people have filed, exhibits on their own. One exhibit would be 200, 250 pages. Others are 20 pages. And when witnesses have filed, then they can get up and answer questions related to their filing. So we had, starting off, a large period of time with big witnesses. We just, as of the end of last week, got public staff to give their testimony. And then we started with one intervener that had and I had questions for that intervener, so it was great to get question him from Rocky Mountain Institute. And he was there. He was an expert witness for the Southern Alliance for Clean Energy and North Carolina Sustainable Energy Association, Sierra Club, some of those things. So the issues seem to be boiling down to what do we do in the near term? And that's, basically Duke has adopted, and I think it's good, they've adopted what we call a check and adjust strategy, where you file a carbon plan, you say, here are the things we need to do in the next 2 years. You all can do those things. After you've got permission from the commission, then in another 2 years, you file another carbon plan. And each time you do it, you've got to look ahead to 2050, how we're going to meet the overall goals. And then your near-term actions need to feed into that long-term. I think that's a pretty good way to do it. The devil is in the details, as you can imagine. Well, what do you really mean by affordability? And one issue is energy burden. What about the energy burden on low-income customers? So that's become an issue of affordability. Another issue of reliability. Well, does that mean you need perfect reliability, in which case, Duke will justify a lot of gas because that's what they know, and they can put gas turbines in and make sure that even if they have a lot of wind and solar, that they're perfectly reliable. But what's the cost of that? Or are there other ways to achieve reliability? And one of my arguments is they're not considering every option that they have to achieve reliability in a future that's dominated by renewable energy. Another, with respect to cost, that becomes the big issue because they run these models that determine least cost based on the model runs. And so you get into the debate about how good the models are and the debate about did they really consider everything they needed to consider in the modeling. So, all in all, it's been a balancing act of how to do it. Now, I think the big issues that are going to be decided is, does the commission give a go-ahead or a plan that builds natural gas fired power plant, another gas fired power plant, to replace the retirements of all the coal plants? That they are going to retire all the coal by the middle of the next decade, and a lot of it by the end of this decade. And they're saying they need new capacity in 2029 to offset that. That's where they're adding big chunk of natural gas, combined cycle and combustion turbine. That to me is the biggest issue. And I think there are a lot of reasons. A lot of the modeling shows that they don't need it. I've discovered, I've just noticed, based on my background in the utility industry, that there was serious flaw in the approach that Duke has taken that makes it much more likely to commit to that first gas plant. So I'm not there today, but I'm hoping that I fed my analysis to some of the other lawyers, and I hope that they will use that in questioning of some of the remaining witnesses. And I'll be tuning in today. You can watch this all on YouTube. I'll be tuning in to see how that goes. But also there's a question of how much, has Duke really done a good job? And I think a lot of the commissioners are saying they haven't done a good job in terms of factoring in the Inflation Reduction Act and the ability of that to impact net metering of solar rooftops and the energy efficiency programs that they are underplaying how much energy efficiency that they might be able to add. So they don't need to add that gas plant in 2029, 2030. So that's about it. And I appreciate the time. It's nice talking to you guys. And I hope I get a chance to answer any questions that anybody might have later on. Thank you, Brad Rouse.
We are grateful to Brad. And again, if those of you have met Brad or know him, have seen him speak before, he absolutely will answer any question that you have, and very much looks forward to meeting and engaging with any of us that are interested in speaking with him. I think he is a real climate hero to take this on as an individual and provide his expertise and time. It's been an incredible time commitment to be in these evidentiary hearings. And as he mentioned, they have been live streamed on YouTube, which has been actually really pretty great. People Power NC, as I mentioned at the beginning of the call, there are many of us that have been tuning in, and I have to say it's been a lot more comprehensive than I would have thought. I am not an expert on these issues, other than I know what I care about, back to the What I Love campaign, and what it means for equity and justice in the world to lift those up as priorities. But even the way the data was presented and the modeling, and beginning to better understand, how and why it is so important for being transparent with regards to the information that we're sharing. And as people of faith, we always say we speak the truth and we seek the truth. And so holding decision makers and Duke Energy and others accountable for the information and content that they're putting forward for us to make the decisions that affect all of our futures is really, really important. So grateful that Brad was able to participate via video. We did hear there is a possibility that today could be the last day of testimony and cross-examination by the different intervening partners. So we'll keep you updated on that as well. So I want to move forward to lifting up what Brad highlighted as an absolute imperative, and probably the biggest question as to how the Utility Commission will really do an analysis around reliability and affordability. And that is going to directly impact the amount of gas that is allowed into the carbon plan. I think probably most of us on this call think it's absolutely absurd to include a fossil fuel sourced generation that would be even considered in a carbon reduction plan. And I just want to share some more of the language that we included in our intervening filing, so you can hear how we laid this out for the commissioners. Too often, the big decisions are made, and the only folks in the room when those decisions are made are those who will benefit from more costly generation from fossil fuels and nuclear power. And in that, pipeline developers have a circular set of economic incentives here to build more gas plants to get more returns on their pipeline extensions. Meanwhile, we know that methane leaks and fossil fuel use must be reduced if we're going to meet the urgent need to protect our mutual home planet. Now is the chance that the North Carolina Utility Commission has the power to empower and engage the millions of North Carolinians who want to be able to build their wealth, reduce their dependency on fossil fuels, and promote justice and equity in our energy system. And I'm highlighting again the statement that was unanimously approved by the North Carolina Council of Churches governing board that represents those 18 denominations that I mentioned earlier. And this was actually passed back in 2017 when we were actively opposing the Atlantic Coast Pipeline. that yay is not being built in North Carolina through all of the activities and actions that took place all across the proposed pipeline corridor in stopping that pipeline. And we do not want any other pipelines to be built in North Carolina. And this is absolutely a moral issue. So that language, which you'll receive in the copy of what our filing was, is important to make sure that we are actively letting everyone know that if we're going to reduce our dependence on fossil fuels as people of faith and conscience, then we need the utilities to reduce the dependence on fossil fuels, because otherwise we can't get off of it either. And I think this is the messaging that really people of faith and conscience need to step far more into the public square and be sharing. And it's a matter of education, inspiration, and mobilization, which is what we're all here to do. I want to recognize that we made this webinar an hour and a half, so we'd have plenty of time for discussion. We're getting close to the end of the formal presentation part of this. So for those of you that can stay on till 2:30, we will have a conversation. But if you have to jump off, this recording will be made available along with all of the links. And there's a social media toolkit that Ren is going to be talking about next. So yeah, we're here for you in any way we can serve. So thanks for joining us. And if you have to jump off, we'll be sure to make sure you know how to get involved, which I'm going to hand it over to Ren right now to help share.
Yeah, I'd love to share some ways that people can take action, direct action, and also just generally the things that we can do to help uplift a better carbon plan. So first of all, just learning about the issue. So, first step is to come to a webinar like this and learn about the carbon plan. But the work doesn't stop at the webinars. I also encourage you to look at our resources and learn even more. Look at the links that we've been sharing in the chat. We have a toolkit that we'll share in a second that has even more resources and, raise community awareness. So that really means, help to share that social media toolkit or other resources that of that other people could really get involved in, and have conversations with your friends and family about the carbon plan and environmental justice. And also support grassroots groups. You could volunteer or donate to groups that are advocating for positive change, and to stay engaged in the conversation. So that means coming to future events and to learn and collaborate as a community. We will probably have another follow-up event after the carbon plan comes out more finalized. So look forward to that in the next several months when that happens. And to get more into details, ways that you can learn more and also raise community awareness, like I said before, check out our social media toolkit. You can go to bit.ly/carbon plan toolkit. That has so many great resources. I will actually go into the resources in a second, but I want to share the rest of the action items first, and then I'll share a little bit more about the toolkit. You can also share your story with us. We really encourage you to go to your story, our plan, and record yourself actually giving, your testimony, your story, your opinions about the carbon plan, about environmental justice in North Carolina. We would love for you to share that, and we will amplify your voices. And we'll share this presentation at the end of it, and all of the links that we have in here, you can click on them right on the presentation and they'll go right to it. So this is a resource within itself. And then also our last action item is that we have a People's Energy Plan survey that we're in partner with. And you can go to bit.ly/NCIPL survey, and it'll take you right to it. We would really, really appreciate if you guys were to take this survey with us. And then lastly, when you do look at this webinar, the slides, you can click on there and you could donate to NCIPL. I would also like to have a shout out for all of the people that have already donated. Actually, like during this webinar or signing up, a lot of people were donating, and we really, really, really appreciate it. Every cent counts. So thank you for that. I'd like to take 1 second just to go to, let's see, just to go to, if I can click on it, the carbon plan toolkit. 1 second. Just so that you all can see what it looks like a bit more. We have a table of contents right here. We have social media, pictures, recording, videos, all that information. And here's the link to it in the chat, by the way, and then more resources. So for social media, you have hashtags and the social media posts. We're actually going to try and do a Twitter storm on October 5th because it's, I forget which specific day it is. Do you remember, Suzanne? It's like Energy Efficiency Day, I want to say.
That's right.
Yes. So if you could post then, that'll be great. We'll give you guys more details coming up to that week. And then we also have pictures. You can go over here and it'll have a link to all of the videos that we shared here today, plus other ones and some pictures for you to share. And then recording a video, you can click right on this link and you can submit your video here, just filling out this form and submitting the video. And then resources, all the resources that we shared with you today, we'll put into here so that you can see them. And several of them are already here. You can follow us on social media and get updated whenever we post. And that's basically the best way to get in contact and stay engaged in the discussion. So look out for all of those things. And yeah, after that, really just wanted to, again, share the resources. You can literally click on each of these and they're hyperlinked in here. So it, and we'll share the slides with you. And I just wanted to say thank you for coming, everyone. And I look forward to discussing with you all your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Ren. And I want to give a special thanks to all of our partners at People Power NC. You can see the variety of organizations, and we're just really grateful to be in this. As I said in the chat, we're stronger together. What I love about being a part of the People Power NC Coalition is that we all have the same end goal and we have different strategies on how to get there. But, you know, we, through dynamic governance, you know, find that sweet spot so that we can all amplify our stories, our resources, and again, just work together so that we can win. So at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording and open it up to the group. For those of you that have stayed on, thank you so much. And for those of you that had to leave earlier, that are watching this at home because somebody shared the recording with you, we look forward to being in touch. So